Welcome to the sleepy underworld, a place where romance blooms, magic sparkles, and timeless fairy tales are reimagined for the dreamers of today. From heart-stirring romances to spellbinding adventures, every story is a soothing escape into a realm of love, wonder, and charm. So curl up, press play, and let us carry you away to the land of dreams. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. We'd love to know in what part of the world you are watching and what is your favorite tip for a good night's sleep. Thank you for watching and enjoy the video. The night ocean breathed in endless whispers, each wave carrying secrets to shore. I stood at my bedroom window, wrapped in the thick summer air, when I first saw the impossible light. It wasn't the familiar silver path of moonlight on the water. This glow pulsed beneath the surface in shades of electric blue and ethereal green, moving with deliberate purpose against the tide. The sight drew me from my bed, my bare feet silent on the weather-worn steps of the beach house. Salt-laden air clung to my skin as I descended to the shore, my cotton nightdress offering little protection against the humid night. The sand felt like warm velvet between my toes, and it still held the day's heat beneath its cooled surface. As I approached the water's edge, the mysterious light intensified. What I'd first taken for bioluminescent algae resolved into distinct points of radiance, each one moving independently like underwater fireflies. They wove intricate patterns beneath the surface, forming a glowing pathway that stretched toward the horizon. The gentle surf kissed my ankles, unexpectedly warm for a night ocean. Each wave carried more of the living lights, their blue-green glow reflecting off my skin until I shimmered. The rational part of my mind, the part that had helped me survive the past year of grief and change, urged caution. But something deeper called to me, an ancient recognition that bypassed thought entirely. I waded deeper, letting the water rise past my knees. My nightdress floated around my thighs, becoming nearly transparent in the otherworldly light. Glowing creatures swirled around me, their touch like pinpricks of electricity against my skin. They seemed to be leading me toward something, or someone. He appeared like a mirage made solid, standing on a sandbar that I knew hadn't existed during my afternoon walks on the beach. The mysterious light circled him in lazy spirals, illuminating features that belonged in a Renaissance painting. Dark hair fell in waves to his shoulders, framing a face of impossible beauty. But it was his eyes that held me motionless. They contained the same phosphorescent glow as the creatures in the water, ancient and knowing and touched with inexpressible sorrow. You see them clearly. His voice carried across the water like distant thunder, deep and resonant. Most mortals perceive only a vague glow, if anything at all. What are they? I continued forward, drawn by a pull I couldn't explain. The water was chest deep now, but the sandbar rose to meet me, solid beneath my feet. The last echoes of what once was. He held out his hand, and several of the lights danced up to spiral around his fingers. My final companions in exile. I'm Kala, I offered, mesmerized by the play of light across his features. Up close, his skin was translucent, like sunlight through sea glass. Adrian. A smile touched his lips, sad but genuine. Though centuries ago, I was called by another name, one your tongue couldn't shape without breaking. The lights pulsed brighter at his words, their glow reflecting off the water droplets in the air until we stood in a sphere of living light. You're not human, I said, the words falling from my lips like stones into still water. No. His smile faded. I am a spirit of these waters, though much diminished from what I once was. Pride and ancient magic bound me to this place, neither fully present nor truly gone. I recognized the ache in his voice. It echoed my own isolation since moving to this small coastal town after my mother's death. My father had retreated into his work, leaving me to navigate my grief alone in a place where every face was a stranger's. "How long have you been here?" "Longer than this shore has held its current shape." Adrian turned and gazed at the horizon, where the full moon hung low and heavy. "The curse that binds me is as old as the first tide. These lights, these fragments of my original form, are all that remain of my power." Without conscious thought, I reached out to touch his arm. His skin felt cool and solid, yet somehow fluid. "Are you in pain?" He looked down at my hand. "Physical pain, no, but watching my essence fade with each passing tide." He let the sentence hang unfinished in the salty air. "Will you tell me about it? About who you were?" The words surprised me even as I spoke them. Adrian studied me for a long moment, his luminous eyes searching my face. "You should return to shore, Calla. The tide is rising, and these waters hold dangers you can't imagine." "I'm not afraid." The statement came out stronger than I intended, and his expression softened. "Perhaps you should be." He stepped back, and the lights swirled around him like a living cloak. "But if you wish to hear my story, return tomorrow night. The choice must be yours." I did return, night after night, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. Adrian taught me the language of the tides and showed me how to read the stories written in the movement of waves. His voice painted pictures of crystal cities beneath the sea, of magic that once flowed as freely as water itself, of a time when the boundary between our worlds was as permeable as morning mist. In return, I shared my own story, of the mother who had filled my childhood with art and music before cancer stole her away, of the father who couldn't bear to look at me because I had her eyes, of the loneliness that had followed me from our city apartment to this quiet beach house. Adrian listened with an intensity that made me feel truly seen for the first time since my mother's death. Time moved differently during our midnight meetings. Sometimes we would sit in comfortable silence, watching the bioluminescent creatures dance beneath the surface. Other nights, Adrian would sing in a language that made my heart ache with its beauty, though I couldn't understand the words. The lights would respond to his voice, creating patterns that told stories of their own. I didn't realize I was falling in love until it was too late. It happened gradually, like the tide coming in, each small moment bringing me deeper until I was surrounded. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle power in his voice when he spoke of ancient magic, the careful way he maintained physical distance between us, even as our emotional connection grew stronger. But something was changing. With each passing night, the sandbar seemed smaller, the water deeper. The bioluminescent creatures, once brilliant enough to illuminate the waves for yards around, began to dim. Adrian's form became less substantial, as if he too were fading with his magic. "Please," I begged one night, as another full moon witnessed our meeting. "Tell me how to help you. There must be a way to break the curse." Pain flickered across his features. "There is a way," he admitted, "but knowing it will only bring you grief." "Tell me anyway." I moved closer, close enough to see the play of light beneath his skin. The curse was designed as both punishment and temptation. His voice dropped to match the whisper of the waves. "If I fall in love with a mortal, truly, completely, without reservation, the magic binding me here will shatter. But when it does, this sandbar will collapse, dragging into the depths anyone caught in its destruction. I would return to the sea, but any mortal." He couldn't finish the sentence. The cruel elegance of the curse struck me like a physical blow. It wasn't just meant to bind him. It was designed to ensure that any chance at love would end in tragedy. "That's why you've kept your distance." Understanding washed over me with the force of a wave. Why Why I never let myself love you as I wanted to. His hand hovered near my cheek, not quite touching. Yes, I would rather fade to nothing than cause your death. But his earlier stories had sparked an idea. You told me humans once crossed between our worlds freely, that the boundary was thinner. In ancient times, yes, but that knowledge has been lost to the ages. Then we'll rediscover it. Determination filled me, pushing back against my despair. You've taught me so much about your world. There must be a way for me to survive in it. Kala, no. I cut him off. I refuse to accept that our only options are watching you fade or dying together. There's always another path. You just have to be brave enough to seek it. The lights around us pulsed brighter, as if responding to my conviction. Adrian studied me with an intensity that peered into my soul. Finally, he spoke. There are legends, tales of mortals who learn to breathe water, to adapt to life beneath the waves. But the process is dangerous, and the price of failure is death. Tell me what I need to do. Over the next week, Adrian shared everything he knew about the old magic. We discovered that the bioluminescent creatures weren't simply remnants of his power. They were keys to transformation. Their light contained the essence of his world, and with proper preparation, they could change a mortal's nature. The ritual required precise timing, midnight during the new moon when the barrier between worlds was thinnest. I would need to drink a mixture of seawater and the creature's essence, then fully submerge in the ocean. If successful, my body would adapt to life underwater. If not, the night of the new moon arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. The sandbar had shrunk to a fraction of its original size, and Adrian's form was so transparent that starlight shone through him. Are you certain? He asked one final time, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Once begun, there's no turning back. I've never been more certain of anything. I took his hand, feeling the cool liquid substance of his skin against mine. I'm not letting you face eternity alone. He pulled me close, and for the first time, pressed his lips to mine. The kiss tasted of salt and magic and possibility, of ancient depths and new beginnings. When we parted, the lights around us blazed brighter than I'd seen in weeks. The curse will still break when I fully embrace my love for you, he warned. The sandbar will still collapse. Then we'd better be ready to swim. I smiled, attempting to project more confidence than I felt. The mixture of seawater and essence glowed like liquid starlight in the shell Adrian had prepared. It smelled of ocean depths and ancient magic, of hope and transformation. The taste defied description, like drinking moonlight and darkness and dreams all at once. Heat spread through my body like lightning through water, making each breath a struggle. Adrian steadied me as I swayed, his touch growing more solid as the magic took effect. Ready? I nodded, unable to speak through the burning in my throat. Together, we walked to the edge of the sandbar. The water below was black in the moonless night, but I could see the bioluminescent creatures gathering in unprecedented numbers, their light turning the depths into a galaxy of blue-green stars. I love you, Adrian whispered, and I felt the sandbar begin to crumble beneath our feet. I love you too. The words escaped as we fell. The water closed over my head, cold and dark and terrifying. For an eternal moment, panic seized me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't tell up from down. Then Adrian's arms were around me, and the burning in my throat transformed into something miraculous. My lungs adapted, drawing oxygen from the water as naturally as air. I opened my eyes to a world of wonder. The bioluminescent creatures swirled around us in a triumphant dance, their light revealing an underwater landscape I'd never imagined. Adrian's true form was magnificent, his human appearance giving way to something both beautiful and strange, with scales that shimmered like opals and eyes that held all the mystery of the deep. He was solid now, fully restored, no longer bound by the curse that had held him for so long. And I was transformed. Not exactly like him, but no longer fully human either. Something in between, capable of living in both worlds. We rose through the water together, breaking the surface to find the sandbar completely gone. The beach looked different from this perspective, distant and dreamlike as if it belonged to another life entirely. "What now?" I asked, discovering I could speak normally despite the changes. Adrian smiled, and the ocean lit up around us. "Now we explore. There are wonders in this world you've never dreamed of, and I want to show you all of them." Hand in hand, we dove beneath the waves, leaving the shore behind. The bioluminescent creatures led the way, their light guiding us toward new adventures and possibilities. I had chosen love over safety, magic over the familiar, and in doing so, found a way to have both. The curse was broken, but the real magic was just beginning. Ahead lay a lifetime of discovering the mysteries of the deep, of learning to navigate between two worlds, of building a love that defied the boundaries of nature itself. Each day would bring new wonders, and each night new adventures, as we explored the endless expanse of a life lived between sea and shore, between magic and mortality, between what was and what could be. The first time I saw one of Kale's ice sculptures come alive beneath the moonlight, time itself stood still. The crystalline wolf padded across the snow-covered square, its transparent form catching the silvery light like 1,000 diamonds scattered across moving glass. Each step left delicate prints in the fresh powder, prints that sparkled with an inner luminescence. Its movements were fluid, graceful, impossibly real for something carved from winter itself. The air around it shimmered with magic, carrying the crisp scent of pine and fresh snow. I had arrived in the remote town of Winter Haven just days before, seeking inspiration for my photography among its snow-laden pines and frost-kissed mountains. The journey here had been long, a series of increasingly smaller plains, and finally a bus that wound through narrow mountain passes until the world became white and wild. The locals spoke of their mysterious sculptor in hushed, reverent tones, their eyes always drifting to the mountains that cupped the town like protective hands. But nothing could have prepared me for the magic I witnessed that night. The wolf turned its head toward me, ice-blue eyes meeting mine across the empty square. They held an intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. Not from cold, but from the raw power I sensed within. Behind it stood its creator, a tall man wrapped in layers of dark wool, his face half hidden by a thick scarf. Even at a distance, I felt the weight of his gaze, heavy as storm clouds before snow. My fingers clutched my camera, but I couldn't bring myself to raise it. Some moments weren't meant to be captured, only experienced. Beautiful, isn't it? An elderly woman appeared beside me, her voice warm as mulled cider on a winter's night. Silver hair escaped from beneath her knitted cap, and her eyes twinkled with knowing. Kyle's gifts bring light to our darkest nights. "How does he do it?" I whispered, unable to look away as the wolf dissolved into mist, carried away on the winter wind. The air where it had stood still sparkled with tiny ice crystals that danced in the moonlight. "Magic has its price, dear." She patted my arm. "Some say it cost him his heart, but perhaps..." She gave me a considering look that made my cheeks warm despite the cold. "Perhaps that's why you're here. I'm Celine Winters. Yes, the irony of my name isn't lost on me. And I've spent my life chasing beautiful things through my camera lens. From the northern lights in Alaska to fire dancers in Hawaii, I've documented magic in all its forms. But standing there in that square, watching the sculptor disappear into the shadows, I knew I had found something beyond mere beauty. I had stumbled upon a mystery that would change everything. The next morning, I found Cale's workshop at the edge of town, a converted barn with walls of weathered wood and windows that sparkled with frost patterns more intricate than any lace. The snow around it lay pristine and untouched, as if nature itself respected this space enough to tread softly. My knock echoed in the still winter air, accompanied by the distant call of ravens. When he opened the door, the scarf was gone, revealing a face that seemed carved from the same ice he worked with, all sharp angles and cold beauty. A scar traced his jaw like a frozen tear, silver white against his skin. His eyes, gray as winter storms, widened slightly at the sight of me. "We're closed to visitors," he said, his voice rough with disuse but carrying notes that made my heart stutter like snowflakes falling. I held up my camera, forcing myself to maintain eye contact, despite the intensity of his gaze. "I'm not here as a visitor. I'm a photographer, and I'd like to document your work." Something flickered in those storm cloud eyes. Interest, perhaps, or warning. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and something else. Something wild and winter sharp that seemed to emanate from him. My sculptures don't survive the lens. They're meant to be experienced, not captured. Then let me experience them. Let me understand how you create such magic. I stepped closer, drawn by something I couldn't name. I've photographed wonders all over the world, but I've never seen anything like what you do. His laugh held no warmth, but it sent sparks through my blood nonetheless. You wouldn't understand. No one does. Try me. That challenge hung between us like frost in the air, delicate and dangerous. Finally, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Your funeral," he said, but I caught the faintest quirk of his lips, gone quick as a snowflake melting. The workshop interior stole my breath again. Sculptures in various stages of completion filled the space. Dancers frozen mid-pirouette, their faces serene and expectant. Birds caught between heartbeats, wings spread in eternal flight. Wolves waiting for moonlight to grant them movement. The air held an otherworldly chill that sank beneath my skin, but it wasn't entirely unpleasant. It felt alive, electric with possibility. "You can watch," Kyle said, moving to a half-formed piece in the center. Light from the high windows caught in his dark hair, highlighting strands of silver that seemed too young for his face. "But don't touch anything, and don't ask questions." I nodded, finding a corner where I could observe without intruding. His hands moved with impossible precision as he worked, chips of ice falling like stars. The only sounds were the whisper of his tools against the ice and our breathing, which synced without either of us noticing. Hours passed, and I watched his creation take shape. A phoenix, its wings swept back in defiance of gravity, its tail feathers detailed down to the smallest crystalline barb. As dusk approached, he finally spoke again, his voice softer than before. "You should go. It's not safe here after dark." "Because that's when they come alive?" I stood, flexing fingers stiff from cold and stillness. His hand stilled on the sculpture. "Because that's when the curse is strongest." "What curse?" He turned, and the sorrow in his eyes made my heart ache. In the fading light, his face held shadows deep as glacier crevasses. "The one that lets me create beauty but never touch it. Never feel warmth again." His fingers traced the scar on his jaw, and I longed to replace them with my own. "You should leave, Celine, before you freeze too." The way he said my name, like it was made of blown glass, something precious and fragile, should have warned me away. Instead, it drew me closer. I couldn't leave. Not when I saw how the loneliness had carved him hollow, like the ice sculptures he brought to life each night. Over the next weeks, I returned each day, watching him work, learning the language of his silence. Sometimes he would tell me fragments of stories about learning his craft from his grandmother, about traveling the world studying ice artistry, about the night everything changed. Our relationship evolved like ice forming on a lake, gradually, then all at once. Each day, I noticed new things. How his hands moved like he was conducting music only he could hear. How his rare smiles transformed his entire face. How he would position himself between me and the door when his sculptures grew restless, always protecting even as he pushed away. I tried to create something that would last, he said one evening as we watched the sun sink behind the mountains. The light painted the snow in shades of rose and gold, and his profile against it made my fingers itch for my camera. Something permanent in a medium meant to be temporary. I thought I could defy nature itself. His laugh was bitter as wind through bare branches. Nature had other ideas. The curse had frozen his heart, binding his soul to the ice. His creations could live, but only in darkness, and only until dawn stole them away. Each sculpture took a piece of his warmth, his humanity, until he became as cold as his art. "But you still create," I said, reaching for his hand. He pulled away before I could touch him, but slower than before, as if it cost him more each time. "It's all I have left." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he had me now, that he didn't have to face the cold alone, that I saw how he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking, with a hunger that had nothing to do with ice or magic, that I felt the same pull, growing stronger with each passing day. But that night, everything changed. It began with the phoenix, his masterpiece, weeks in the making. As moonlight touched it, the ice bird spread its wings of frost and fire. But something was different. The magic felt wrong, wild, uncontrolled. More sculptures awakened, their movements jerky and aggressive. Ice spread from their feet, crawling across the ground like living frost, crackling as it grew. "No," Kale whispered, and the fear in his voice made my blood run cold. "It's happening again." The temperature plummeted. The windows frosted over in seconds, each ice crystal blooming like stop-motion flowers. The phoenix screamed, a sound like breaking glaciers, and ice exploded outward. I threw myself behind a workbench as shards filled the air, sharp enough to cut. "Celine," Kale's voice cut through the chaos. "You have to get out. Not without you." I fought my way to his side, ignoring the ice that bit at my exposed skin. Each breath burned in my lungs, and my tears froze before they could fall. "Tell me how to help." "You can't. The curse." "To hell with the curse." I grabbed his face between my hands. His skin burned with cold, but I held on. Frost immediately began spreading from where we touched, climbing my arms like delicate vines. "You're not alone anymore, Kale. Let me in." For a moment, the storm of ice and magic raged around us. Then his hands covered mine, and I felt something crack. Not ice, but the walls he'd built around his heart. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw fear there. Not of the magic, but of losing me. "The curse can only be broken by sacrifice," he said, his voice raw with emotion. A willing exchange of warmth for cold. "But Celine..." His thumbs brushed my cheeks, leaving trails of frost that tingled rather than burned. "I can't ask that of you." I understood then. All those years ago, he had given his warmth to his art, attempting to make it permanent. Now someone had to give their warmth to him, to make him human again. The choice was simple. "Take it," I whispered, leaning closer until our breath mingled in the frigid air. "Take my warmth. It could kill you." His voice broke on the last word. "Or it could save us both." The kiss was like touching winter itself, sharp, shocking, beautiful. I felt the cold rush into me as my warmth flowed into him. Ice crystals formed on my lashes, in my hair, on my skin. But underneath the cold, I felt his heart beginning to beat again, warm and human and alive. His lips softened against mine, and his arms pulled me closer, desperate and gentle all at once. The magic shifted, rebalanced. Around us, the savage ice sculptures stilled, their wild energy calming. The phoenix dissolved into gentle snowfall that sparkled like diamond dust in the moonlight. When we finally broke apart, I saw tears freezing on Kale's cheeks. But his eyes held warmth I had never seen before, and his skin no longer burned with cold. "You're freezing," he said, touching my face with hands that now felt wonderfully, humanly warm. I smiled, despite the cold that had settled in my bones. "Only a little. We'll have to share your warmth." And we did. The curse wasn't broken entirely. Magic never disappears completely, but it was transformed. Now Kale's sculptures come alive under moonlight with gentle grace, dancing through the winter nights before returning to sleep at dawn. And if the town's photographer sometimes seems to sparkle with frost in certain lights, if her photographs capture impossible moments of magic that shouldn't show up on film, well, magic always leaves its mark on those who embrace it. We learn to balance the warm and cold between us, like summer and winter meeting in an endless dance. His art still brings joy to the town, but now it comes from a place of love rather than loneliness. And on the coldest nights, when we watch his creations dance beneath the moon, I remember that some things are worth getting a little frozen for. Every morning, I wake to find frost patterns on our windows, his way of saying good morning, each one unique as a kiss. Every evening I catch him watching me with wonder, as if he still can't believe I chose to share his winter world. And every night, we create our own magic, warming each other's souls in ways that no curse could ever touch. They say love thaws the coldest hearts. But sometimes, love is learning to dance with the frost, to find beauty in the delicate balance between warm and cold, permanent and fleeting, mortal and magical. Sometimes love is choosing to stay even when the ice starts to creep in. I wouldn't have it any other way. Moonlight poured through our third-floor apartment window like liquid silver, casting gentle stripes across the worn ivory keys of our Baldwin upright piano. The brass pedals caught the light, their scratched surfaces telling stories of countless hours of practice and performance. My fingers hovered over middle C, my muscle memory yearning to slip into autumn in New York, but I held back. In our aging building with its paper-thin walls, Mrs. Rodriguez next door would hear every note. The sharp scent of diner coffee still clung to my uniform, mingling with the chalky residue from my morning job at the elementary school. 2 jobs barely kept us afloat, and the stack of bills on the coffee table grew more daunting each week. The latest edition, Layla's AP Music Theory textbook invoice, was perched on top, the $300 price tag a taunting reminder that I was broke. From her bedroom came the soft sound of my daughter's breathing, as familiar to me as any jazz standard I'd ever performed. At 16, Layla carried music in her blood just as I had, but where I once commanded stages with electric confidence, she buried her gift behind shower song whispers and bedroom door melodies. A floorboard's gentle protest announced Layla's presence before I saw her. There she stood in the doorway, wrapped in her grandmother's quilted robe, the once vibrant purple now softened to the color of dusk. Her dark curls tumbled wild and free around her face, so like mine at her age that my heart constricted with the sight. "Can't sleep?" I whispered into the midnight quiet. She padded across the floor, her bare feet silent on the worn hardwood, and joined me on the piano bench. The ancient wood creaked softly beneath us, a sound that carried echoes of countless lullabies and bedtime stories. "Andrea Martinez is performing at Carnegie Hall next month," Layla said, her voice barely audible as her fingers traced invisible patterns on her pajama pants. "She's only 14, Mom. Everyone says she's destined for greatness." The weight of deferred dreams hung heavy in her words. Memories flooded back, standing under the hot lights at the Blue Note, my voice soaring over a packed house while saxophone riffs wove through the melody like golden threads. That taste of success had been intoxicating, until 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test rewrote my story. "You know what my grandmother used to tell me?" I said, my fingers finding their place on the keys. "Every voice has its season to bloom. Like flowers, some open in spring, others wait for autumn, but each one brings its own perfect beauty when the time is right." I began to play our family lullaby, a melody passed down through generations of women. The notes seemed to take on a life of their own, shimmering in the air like heat waves rising from summer pavement. They glowed with an impossible golden light that didn't belong in our dimly lit living room. Then came the miracle. Layla started to sing. Her voice joined mine, pure and clear as mountain spring water. Our harmonies intertwined like loving arms, mother and daughter, past and present merging into something greater than ourselves. The golden light grew stronger until it pulsed with each note. At that moment, I could have sworn I caught the sweet scent of my grandmother's gardenia perfume and felt the ghost of her hand against my cheek, just as I had when she first taught me this song 30 years ago. That night marked the beginning of Layla's transformation. Like a flower turning toward the sun, her confidence grew with each passing day. She stopped hiding her voice and began humming while doing homework, singing along to the jazz records she'd once ignored. The magic in our shared melody had awakened something essential in her soul, the understanding that music wasn't about perfection or performance, but about love made audible. When the Manhattan School of Music's letter arrived announcing auditions for their Young Artists program, I found my daughter in the bathroom, her trembling hands clutching the cream-colored envelope. "I can't," she whispered, but her eyes told a different story. They were bright with the same hunger that had once burned in my own heart. We recorded her audition video in the school auditorium after hours, thanks to Mr. Thompson, her choir director who'd believed in her since day one. She sang, "Someone to Watch Over Me," her voice carrying all the longing and hope I'd once poured into that same song. The email requesting a live audition felt like the universe confirming what I'd always known. My daughter was born for this. Then came the migraines. At first, I dismissed them as stress headaches from picking up extra shifts to save for the audition trip. But they worsened, bringing waves of dizziness that made the diner's checkered floor swim beneath my feet. Then there was the bone-deep fatigue that no amount of coffee could touch. When I collapsed during Mrs. Jackson's daughter's piano lesson, the world spinning into darkness, there was no more denying something was wrong. The neurologist's words fell like hammer blows: glioblastoma, aggressive growth, immediate treatment needed. But one phrase wounded me to the core: 6 months, maybe 8 with treatment. Layla refused to leave my side, ready to withdraw her application. But I wouldn't let her sacrifice her dreams the way I had once sacrificed mine. Between rounds of chemotherapy that turned my world inside out and left my skin feeling like it was on fire, I taught her the lullaby's deepest secrets: how to let the magic flow from your heart to your voice, how to weave love into every note. The night before her rescheduled audition, I was too weak to sit up. Layla brought her laptop to my hospital room, and we watched videos of my old performances at the Blue Note. In one, I wore the midnight blue dress that now hung in her closet, my voice riding the rhythm section like a bird catching an updraft. "Why did you really stop?" she asked, her warm hand holding mine. Was it because of me? I turned to face her, ignoring the pull of my IV lines. I stopped performing because I found something better. Every smile, every laugh, every song I shared with you meant more than all the applause in the world. The steady beep of monitors kept time as she curled beside me in the narrow bed. Sing with me, Mom. One last time before tomorrow. The lullaby rose between us, softer now, but no less powerful. Golden light danced through the sterile hospital room, chasing away shadows of illness and fear. For a fleeting moment, the pain ebbed away like the retreating tide, leaving only something more powerful in its wake. Love, as pure and boundless as music. Morning brought a fever that kept me from traveling to Manhattan. Through a shaky FaceTime connection, I watched Layla enter the auditorium, wearing my old dress carefully altered to fit her younger frame. The video failed just as she stepped up to the microphone. I drifted between consciousness and dreams, hospital monitors marking time instead of metronomes. Then something changed. Warmth spread through my chest, different from the burning of the medication. A song echoed in my bones, familiar as my own heartbeat. Layla was singing our lullaby, miles away, on a stage in Manhattan. My daughter's voice carried the magic we'd shared, strengthened by generations of love and sacrifice. The golden light surrounded me, brighter than ever, and I felt strength returning with each note. Later, she told me how it happened, how stage fright had frozen her until she remembered my words about music being love made audible, how she'd closed her eyes and sung our song, letting its magic fill the hall until even the stern-faced judges wiped away tears. The day her acceptance letter arrived, full scholarship included, coincided with the week my doctor used the phrase, unexplained regression. Science couldn't explain my recovery, but I knew the truth. Love is the oldest magic there is, and music is its purest expression. 1 year later, I stood on the stage of the Blue Note, my fingers resting on piano keys that felt like old friends. The spotlight warmed my skin as I watched Layla step to the microphone, confidence flowing from her like light. My hands found the opening chords of Autumn in New York, and when she sang, every dream I'd ever had paled in comparison to that moment. Her voice soared through the club, carrying echoes of every lullaby, every lesson, every moment of love between mothers and daughters since time began. The golden light shimmered around us, visible now only to those who knew its secret. But everyone in the room felt its effects. In the tears that slipped down cheeks, in the way strangers reached for their loved ones' hands, in the pure joy radiating from two women who had found their dreams in one another. As the final note faded into reverent silence, I understood that some songs never truly end. They live on in the spaces between heartbeats, in the quiet moments before dawn, in the love passed down from a mother to a daughter. They're in every lullaby sung to a sleepless child, every melody that gives courage to the fearful, every note that carries healing to those in pain. The magic wasn't in the song itself, but in what it revealed. That love, like music, transcends time and space, illness and fear. It transforms and heals, gives courage and hope. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it helps us find our way back to dreams we thought were lost, only to discover they've grown into something even more beautiful than we imagined. Layla turned to me as applause filled the club, her smile brighter than any spotlight. In her eyes, I saw my mother, my grandmother, all the women who had sung their love through generations. The melody lived in us still, golden and eternal as the bond between mother and daughter, ready to be shared with those who needed its magic most. Outside, the New York night pulsed with its own rhythm, taxi horns and subway rumbles, laughter and footsteps, all the songs of the city we now called home. But in that moment, there was only this: a mother, a daughter, and the music that had saved them both. As we took our final bow, our hands clasped tight, I knew that our story, like our song, would echo through time, touching hearts and healing souls long after the last note had faded away. The waves whispered my secrets as I watched him from beneath their crystalline surface, the moonlight filtering through the water in ribbons of silver. I had ruled these waters for centuries, commanding currents and calming storms with mere thoughts, my magic flowing through the seas like liquid starlight. But now, watching Captain Evander stand at the helm of his ship, his dark hair tousled by the salty breeze, and his strong hands gripping the wheel, I felt powerless for the first time in my immortal life. His fingers danced across the strings of a battered lute, weathered by sea spray but still singing true. The melody pierced through the barrier between our worlds, each note resonating in my chest, as if he played upon my heartstrings instead. The song spoke of loss, of battles fought and comrades fallen, and I could taste the salt of unshed tears mixing with the eternal sea around me. I knew every note by heart, having watched him play it night after night as his ship crossed my waters, the music becoming as much a part of me as the tides themselves. My name is Cordelia, and I was, a sea sorceress, my domain stretching from the sun-dappled shallows to the darkest trenches where ancient creatures slumber. That changed the night I broke our most sacred law and saved him, though I would break 1,000 more laws just to see his smile again. The storm had come without warning, even to one as attuned to the ocean's moods as I. Lightning split the sky like silver serpents, and waves rose like mountains around his ship, their peaks crowned with angry foam. I watched in horror as a massive swell swept him overboard, his lute still clutched in his hands, his body small and vulnerable against the ocean's fury. Without hesitation, I surged forward, my powerful tail cutting through the churning waters, the scales gleaming with their own phosphorescent light. His eyes met mine as I wrapped my arms around him, his eyes the color of storm clouds, wide with wonder rather than fear. Their depths held such pain, such loneliness, that I felt it echo in my own immortal heart. In that moment, as the storm raged around us, and his warmth seeped into my cold skin, I knew I would risk everything to see those eyes again, to understand the stories written in their stormy depths. The ancient temple of the banished ocean god lay in the deepest trench of my realm, where even the bravest of my kind feared to swim. Marble columns, green with age and draped in luminescent seaweed, rose from the darkness like the ribs of a long-dead leviathan. Strange, eyeless creatures darted through the shadows, drawn to the last remnants of the god's power. The god himself appeared as a swirling mass of darkness, his voice echoing through the water like distant thunder, making my bones vibrate with its power. "Your heart betrays you, little sorceress," he said, tendrils of shadow caressing my face like ice-cold silk. How amusing that one who has commanded the seas for so long now wishes to be bound by human flesh. Tell me, what makes this mortal worth such a price? I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze. 3 swirling vortexes of ancient power. Love makes fools of gods and mortals alike. Name your price. His laughter shook the temple foundations, sending centuries of accumulated sand swirling through the water. Your voice, for starters, such a powerful thing, a sea witch's voice. And pain, every step you take on land will feel like walking on broken glass dipped in lightning. You have 3 lunar cycles to win his love. If you fail, your soul is mine, and your waters will fall to chaos. Choose carefully, little witch. I nodded without hesitation, my heart thundering against my ribs. The transformation felt like being torn apart and stitched back together with burning thread, every scale ripped away, every gill sealed shut. My tail split into legs with a pain that would have made me scream if I still had a voice. Instead, I watched in silent agony as my voice dissolved into sea foam, carrying away centuries of spells and songs. The pain was excruciating, but nothing compared to the agony of my first steps on the beach near Evander's coastal kingdom, each footfall sending shocks of white-hot pain through my newly formed legs. A fisherman found me wrapped in seaweed and sailed me to the harbor, his weather-beaten face kind as he draped his rough wool cloak around my shoulders. Word of a mysterious woman discovered on the shore spread quickly through the port town, whispers following me like trailing seaweed as I was led through streets that smelled of salt fish and fresh bread, eventually reaching the castle where Evander served as the kingdom's naval commander. I will never forget the moment he first saw me on land. The morning sun caught the silver threads in his dark hair, and those storm-gray eyes widened with recognition, not of who I truly was, but of something familiar he couldn't quite place. Something that called to him as surely as the sea itself. He offered me shelter in the castle, moved perhaps by the same inexplicable pull that had drawn me to him, his calloused hand gentle as he helped me up the stone steps. Each day brought new challenges and discoveries. The pain of walking was constant, like treading on shattered stars, but I learned to dance through it, expressing through movement what I could not say in words. I watched Evander closely, learning the weight he carried in the set of his broad shoulders, the shadows that crossed his face when thunder rolled in from the sea. The war had left more than physical scars. He blamed himself for leading his men into an ambush that cost many lives, their ghosts haunting him in the quiet hours before dawn. At night, I would find him on the battlements, playing his lute to the sea as if seeking answers in its endless depths. I began to dance to his music, my feet bleeding in my silk slippers but my heart soaring with each turn. Sometimes, he would watch me with an intensity that made my heart race, as if trying to understand the emotion I poured into every movement. His music would change then, becoming something softer, sweeter, a melody that spoke of hope rather than regret. Lady Miranda, a nobleman's daughter with eyes like green glass and a smile that never reached them, watched our growing closeness with venomous intent. She had set her sights on Evander long ago, seeing him as her path to power within the court. Her whispered rumors painted me as a spy, a witch, if only she knew how close to the truth she was. Each word she spoke dripped with honey-coated poison, designed to plant seeds of doubt in Evander's mind. As the second lunar cycle waned, painting the nights with its silver light, Evander began to thaw. He spoke to me of the battle that haunted him, of the weight of command and the price of survival. I listened, offering comfort through touch, a hand on his arm, fingers entwined with his, my thumb tracing the scars that marked his skin. Each contact sent sparks through my body, worth every step of pain, every silent scream, every moment of vulnerability. But Lady Miranda wasn't finished with her schemes. She arranged for letters to be discovered, suggesting I was an agent of an enemy kingdom. Each forged document, a carefully crafted arrow aimed at Evander's heart. He defended me before the court, his voice ringing with conviction, but I saw doubt cloud his eyes like gathering storm clouds. The pain of his uncertainty cut deeper than my cursed feet ever could. The final lunar cycle began with a storm that rivaled the one that had brought us together. Lightning turned night to day, and thunder shook the castle walls like the footsteps of giants. As rain lashed against the windows, Miranda confronted Evander with her most damning evidence. Fabricated documents bearing my real identity, sealed with stolen wax and forged with malicious care. I knew I had to choose before the rising tide of lies drowned what we had built. That night, I took Evander's hand and led him to the shore, each step sending shards of agony through my legs. The waves called to me, singing of home and power and freedom from pain. But as I looked into his storm-gray eyes, now dark with concern and confusion, I knew I would choose this agony 1,000 times over. I pressed his hand to my throat, letting him feel the smooth skin where my voice should have been. Then I drew symbols in the wet sand, telling him everything. What I was, what I had sacrificed, why I couldn't speak. With each revelation, I prepared for rejection, for disgust, for fear. My heart pounded against my ribs like waves against a cliff, threatening to break me apart. Instead, he pulled me close, his arms strong and sure around me, his warmth chasing away the chill of fear. I hear you, he whispered against my hair, his voice rough with emotion. I've always heard you. In every dance, every touch, every silent moment, you've been singing to my soul. The kiss that followed felt like breaking through the surface after a deep dive. That first, desperate breath of air. His lips were soft against mine, tasting of salt and something sweeter, something purely him. Love bloomed between us like coral, beautiful and strong and slowly built. His hands cradled my face as if I were something precious, something worth protecting, worth cherishing. His lips found mine again and again, each kiss a different kind of magic than any I had known beneath the waves. The ocean god appeared as the third moon reached its peak, his darkness spreading across the water like spilled ink. How disappointing, he said, his voice carrying across the waves like an Arctic wind. I had so looked forward to claiming your soul. The chaos we could have created together would have been magnificent. Evander stepped forward, his lute in hand, and his eyes blazing with determination. You can't have her, he declared, his voice steady and strong against the god's ancient power. Bold words from a mortal, the god sneered, his form writhing with shadows. What could you possibly offer in exchange? What could equal the power she would have brought to my realm? Evander began to play, not his usual melodies of loss and regret, but something new. A song of love and redemption, of finding light in the darkest depths, of two hearts beating in perfect harmony despite all odds. As the music swelled, I felt power surge through me, ancient and new all at once. My voice returned in a rush, joining his song in perfect harmony, our music weaving together like streams joining a river. The god recoiled as our combined music wove a spell more powerful than any I had cast before. Love, I realized, was its own kind of magic, one that even the oldest gods must respect. It flowed between us like a current, strong and deep and endless, more powerful than any curse or blessing. Keep your soul, the god spat, his form already fading like mist before the morning sun. And your voice. But the pain remains, a reminder of your choice, of what you gave up for this mortal love. I turned to Evander, touching his face, memorizing every line and plane by touch. Every step is worth it, I said, speaking to him for the first time, my voice rough from disuse but full of love. Every moment of pain brings me closer to you. I would walk through fire just to see you smile. He kissed me again, and I tasted salt. Whether from tears or sea spray, I couldn't tell. Then let me carry you, he whispered, lifting me into his arms as if I weighed nothing at all, as if he would gladly bear any burden to ease my pain. Let me be your shelter, as you have been my light. That night, as we lay together watching the stars wheel overhead, I understood that true love isn't about sacrifice. It's about choice. Every day, I choose him. Every step, every pain, every moment of vulnerability is a choice I make gladly. And every night, as he plays his lute and I sing our story to the waves, I know I always will. The sea still calls to me sometimes, its voice familiar and sweet, promising power and freedom from pain. But I have found a different kind of magic in Evander's arms, in the way he looks at me as if I'm something precious, in the gentle way he tends to my feet each night with hands that have known both battle and tenderness. We have built a life between two worlds, not quite of the sea, not fully of the land, but perfectly our own. And when the pain threatens to overwhelm me, when I doubt my choice to walk this path, Evander reminds me that love isn't measured in steps or words or grand gestures. It's measured in the small moments, his fingers entwined with mine as we watch the sunset, the soft brush of his lips against my temple when he thinks I'm sleeping, the way he still watches me dance as if seeing me for the first time. In these moments, I know that no magic could ever compare to the miracle of finding someone who sees your soul and loves you, not despite your sacrifices, but because of them. I may no longer command the tides, but I have found a different kind of power in loving him. It flows between us like an eternal current, strong and deep and endless. And that, more than any magic, more than any power or immortality or painless step, is worth every price I paid to find it. For in his arms I have found something even the ancient gods cannot grant. A love that transforms, heals, and makes every moment of pain bloom into something beautiful. The first time I saw him dance, I forgot how to breathe. Through the steam rising from the copper washing tub, his form cut through the morning mist like a dream, all fluid motion and quiet grace. It wasn't proper for the son of a duke to practice his dancing in the palace gardens where the servants worked, but Lucas had never cared much for being proper. I shouldn't have been watching. My hands were raw from scrubbing linens, and Madame Blackwood would have my head if she caught me idling. But at that moment, as Lucas spun beneath the ancient apple trees, I couldn't look away. Magic sparked in the air around him, though he couldn't see it. Little motes of golden light that danced in his wake, drawn to him just as I was. My name is Elena, though my step-family hasn't used it in years. To them, I'm girl, or you there, or most often, ash, because I'm forever covered in soot from tending the kitchen fires. 10 years ago, I was the cherished daughter of a wealthy merchant who married what he thought was a genteel widow. 3 months after he died of fever, I learned what genteel truly meant. But I had my small magics to comfort me. My mother, my real mother, had been a hedge witch of considerable talent. She died before she could teach me properly, but she left behind her grimoire and her gift running wild in my blood. I could charm mice to help me with my mending, convince the kitchen herbs to grow despite the frost, and when I danced alone in the garden at midnight, flowers bloomed beneath my feet. Lucas didn't know about any of that, of course. To him, I was just another servant he passed in the hallways when he came to his aunt's manor for tea. Lady Blackwood, my stepmother, was forever trying to match her daughters with him. I couldn't blame her. Besides being heir to a dukedom, Lucas had a smile that could melt frost and eyes like summer storms. But there was something more to him, something that called to the magic in my blood. I watched him dance in secret for months, learning the rhythm of his movements, and the way he spoke to himself as he practiced complex steps. Sometimes he would pause and look around as if sensing someone's gaze, and I would duck behind the laundry, my heart pounding. Once, I could have sworn he smiled directly at my hiding spot, but that had to be my imagination. Everything changed the night of the Starlight Ball. It was a grand masquerade held once every 7 years when the moon was full for 3 nights running. Every noble family in the kingdom attended, and the magic in the air was thick enough to taste. "You'll need to press all the gowns again," Madame Blackwood informed me that morning. "And mind you don't burn them this time." She didn't need to remind me of my punishment for that past transgression. The scars on my palms remembered well enough. What she didn't know was that I had burned the gown deliberately, after seeing the way she had struck Ruby for speaking out of turn. My magic had reacted instinctively, protecting the only way it could. I worked through the day without rest, preparing my stepsisters for the ball. Their dresses were masterpieces of silk and silver thread, their masks adorned with peacock feathers and moonstones. As I pinned up their hair, they chattered about Lucas. "He has to choose a bride soon," Daphne said, preening before the mirror. "Father says the old duke is insisting on it." "He'll choose me," Ruby declared, though there was a tremor in her voice. Of my 2 stepsisters, Ruby had always been kinder, trapped in her mother's web just as surely as I was. We danced together at the summer festival. I bit my cheek to keep from pointing out that Lucas had danced with everyone that night, including the elderly countess and her prize poodle. But I had seen the way his eyes glazed over during those dances, the way his smile never quite reached them. He moved with perfect precision, but no joy, like a clockwork figure going through the motions. When they finally departed in the family carriage, I allowed myself a moment of weakness. I went to my mother's trunk, the one thing of hers I'd managed to keep hidden, and pulled out her grimoire. The pages fell open to a familiar enchantment, one that could make old things new again, that could reveal the truth beneath any facade. I had never attempted anything so complex before. My small magics were one thing, but this was true witchcraft. Still, as I heard the distant music begin to drift from the palace, something in my heart shifted. The magic in my blood sang in harmony with the night's wild power, and I knew with sudden certainty that this was what my mother had been preparing me for all along. "Help me," I whispered to the mice who were my only friends. They had been watching me dance in secret for years, just as I watched Lucas. "Please." They scattered into the shadows, returning with bits of broken glass that sparkled like diamonds, scraps of silver thread, and flowers that bloomed by moonlight. I began to sing the spell, my voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each verse. The words felt ancient on my tongue, as though they had been waiting centuries to be spoken. The magic rose around me like starlight taking form. My ragged dress transformed into flowing silk the color of midnight, scattered with tiny lights that twinkled like the night sky. My mother's old mask became delicate silver filigree, and my work-worn boots turned to glass so fine it sang when I walked. But they weren't truly glass. They were crystallized starlight, harder than diamond and light as air. The last part of the spell was the most complex. As the magic settled over me, my appearance shifted subtly. Not enough to make me unrecognizable, but enough that no one would connect the glittering creature I'd become with the ash-covered servant girl they knew. It was a revelation of truth rather than a disguise, showing the person I might have been if grief and cruelty hadn't reshaped my life. The spell would last until the third moon set, the book warned. 3 nights of magic, and then everything would return to what it had been. But perhaps, whispered a voice that sounded like my mother's, that would be enough. I hadn't planned what I would do once I arrived at the ball. But as I entered the grand ballroom, Lucas turned as though drawn by an invisible thread. Our eyes met through our masks, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The magic in my blood leapt toward him like a compass needle finding true north. He crossed the room to me, bowing deeply. "I don't believe we've met," he said, though something in his voice held a question. His eyes, behind his mask of gold and obsidian, were wide with wonder. "No," I agreed, letting my normal speaking voice shift into something more melodious. "We haven't. But we have," I thought. "I know the way you count steps under your breath, the way you run your hand through your hair when frustrated, the way you dance alone in the morning mist. Would you honor me with a dance?" I placed my hand in his, and the orchestra began to play. We moved together as though we'd been practicing all our lives. Perhaps we had. All those mornings I'd watched him dance in the garden had taught me his rhythms, the way he liked to move. But this was different from his practiced court dances. This was pure joy, wild and free as the magic that swirled around us. "You dance beautifully," he murmured as we spun beneath the enchanted ceiling, where illusory stars wheeled overhead. "As though you've learned from watching the wind itself." "I had a good teacher," I replied without thinking. His steps faltered for just a moment. "Did you?" I quickly changed the subject, asking him about his family's lands. He spoke of his father's estates, but there was something troubled in his voice. "You don't sound eager to inherit," I observed. Lucas was quiet for several turns about the floor. "I love our lands," he said finally. But I don't love what's expected of me. My father wants me to marry for political advantage, to rule exactly as he has ruled. Sometimes I feel like a character in a play, speaking lines written for someone else." He paused, then added softly, "Except when I dance, or when I'm with you." The honesty in his voice made my heart ache. "I know what that's like," I said softly. "To live a life others have chosen for you." He drew me closer, one hand warm against my waist, and we danced in silence for a while. When the song ended, he didn't let go of my hand. "Walk with me in the garden?" The night air was sweet with jasmine, and magic hung heavy as dew. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, books we'd read, places we dreamed of seeing, the way the stars looked on clear nights. He never asked my name or family connections, and I never offered them. Instead, we spoke of deeper things, hopes and fears, dreams and disappointments. With each word, the connection between us grew stronger. "There's something about you," he said at one point, his fingers brushing my cheek. "Something that feels like coming home." As moonset approached, I reluctantly pulled away. "I have to go." "Wait," he called after me. "Will you come tomorrow night?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." The second night, we danced until our feet should have ached, but the starlight shoes kept me floating. When we needed rest, we escaped to the palace library where Lucas showed me his favorite volumes of poetry. He read aloud to me, his voice making the words come alive, and I taught him the old folk songs my mother used to sing. "There's something familiar about you," he said at one point, studying my face through my mask. "As though I've known you before. Sometimes when I practice my dancing in the morning, I feel someone watching, someone who understands." My heart stuttered. "Perhaps you have." He leaned closer, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me. But then a clock chimed somewhere in the palace, and I remembered who I was, who I really was. The third night, I almost didn't go. It would be easier, I told myself, to let the magic fade without having to say goodbye. But as I stood in my tiny attic room, looking at the grimoire, I knew I would regret it forever if I didn't take this last chance. Lucas was waiting by the garden entrance. Before I could speak, he took my hand and led me to a secluded corner of the grounds where a fountain played beneath the moon. The water sang with magic, and I realized with a start that it was responding to him. "I know who you are," he said quietly. My blood turned to ice. "What?" "Elena." He reached up and gently removed my mask. "I've watched you dance in the garden at midnight, when you thought no one could see. I've seen the way flowers bloom where you walk, even in winter." His smile was soft. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize your magic? It calls to mine." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "You have magic too?" "A little. Nothing like yours. Just enough to feel it in others, to know when something extraordinary is near." He brushed away my tears with his thumb. "I've been falling in love with you for months, watching you from windows and finding excuses to visit my aunt. The way you move, the way you care for others even when they hurt you, the strength that shines through no matter how they try to dim it. But I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us until you did it first." "I'm just a servant," I whispered, "and a witch. You're the only person who's ever seen me as myself, not just my title." He pressed his forehead to mine. "And I don't care if you're a witch or a washerwoman or a queen. I love you. Your magic calls to mine just as your heart calls to my heart." The clock began to strike midnight. I felt the magic beginning to unravel, my glamoured gown shifting back to rags. But Lucas held me tighter. "Stay," he whispered against my lips. "Stay with me." And when he kissed me, new magic bloomed between us, not my mother's spells or the ambient power of the starlight ball, but something entirely our own. Where our feet touched the ground, starflowers sprouted and bloomed, their light reflecting off my crystallized starlight shoes, which alone remained unchanged. The scandal rocked the kingdom, a duke's heir marrying a servant girl who practiced hedge magic. But Lucas's father, after meeting me and seeing how his son lit up in my presence, proved more understanding than anyone expected. "There's old magic in our bloodline too," he confided. "I always wondered when it would wake again." My step-family was less pleased, but with Lucas's support, I was finally able to claim my inheritance as my father's daughter. Madame Blackwood and her daughters found themselves having to work for a living for the first time in their lives, though I made sure Ruby was provided for. She lives in a cottage on our lands now, growing herbs and slowly learning to smile again. We were married in the garden where we had first watched each other dance. I still dance in the garden at midnight sometimes, but now Lucas dances with me. Our magic twines together, gold and silver, creating something more beautiful than either of us could manage alone. And everywhere our feet touch the earth, starflowers bloom, glowing with a light that never fades. The crimson cloak wrapped around my shoulders like a lover's embrace, its enchanted silk warming me against the perpetual autumn chill gripping the moonwood since the curse fell. My grandmother's warning echoed, "Stay on the silver path, Ruby. The woods have changed, and my strongest magic cannot protect you if you stray." A basket of healing herbs swung gently from my arm as I picked my way between pools of moonlight that dotted the forest floor. Witch's nightshade, moon orchids, and starleaf bramble, rare ingredients that only bloomed in eternal moonlight, were crucial for my grandmother's most powerful remedies. As her apprentice and the only other healer with the gift in 3 generations, these midnight journeys had become my duty since her hands had grown too shaky to harvest the delicate blooms herself. I pulled my hood closer, the fabric shimmering with the protective enchantments my grandmother had woven into every stitch with strands of her silver hair. The cloak was her masterwork, created to shield me from the dark magic that had seeped into the woods during the eternal nightfall 3 years ago. Now the moon never set, and shadows held teeth. A wolf's howl pierced the silence, closer than any I'd heard before. I clutched my silver pendant, another of my grandmother's protective gifts, warm with centuries of ancestral magic, and quickened my pace. The path ahead sparkled with moonstone pebbles, marking the safe way through the haunted woods. My boots made no sound on the enchanted stones, another of my grandmother's precautions. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Little Red. The woods hunger for innocent blood." The voice rolled through the darkness like thunder, rich and deep, sending shivers down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. I spun around, my heart pounding against my ribs like a caged bird seeking freedom. A man emerged from the shadows, moving with a predatory grace that made my breath catch. His eyes gleamed gold in the moonlight, and dark hair fell in waves past his shoulders, adorned with small braids threaded with silver beads that chimed softly as he moved. He wore a black leather coat that seemed to absorb the darkness around him, and his smile held secrets that made my pulse race. "The path is protected," I said, touching my pendant again, drawing comfort from its familiar warmth. "And I'm hardly alone with my grandmother's magic guarding me." The pendant pulsed beneath my fingers, but it didn't warn of danger. Strange, given what my companion clearly was. His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just a bit too sharp. "Ah, you're the healer's granddaughter. I've heard whispers of you in the dark places. They say your potions can cure any ailment, except a cursed heart." He moved closer, and I caught his scent. Pine needles and winter wind, with an underlying warmth that made my blood sing. "And you are?" I asked, though something in me already knew. The stories whispered in the village came rushing back. tales of the cursed prince who had vanished the night eternal darkness fell, transformed by dark magic into something neither man nor beast. Some said he'd been cursed by a jealous sorcerer, others that he'd delved too deep into forbidden magic himself. But all agreed that his disappearance had brought eternal night to the realm. "Alaric," he said, bowing with a fluid grace that belonged in a royal court rather than a haunted forest. "Once prince of this realm, now lord of shadows, and you are Ruby, the red-cloaked healer who dares to walk my woods at night." The way he said my name sounded like a caress. My breath caught. Every instinct told me to run, but something in his eyes held me in place. A loneliness that echoed my own. A pain that called to the healer in my soul. Even amid his curse, I could see traces of the prince he'd been, in the noble arch of his brow, the graceful way he held himself, the intelligence that burned behind his beast-gold eyes. "If you know who I am, then you know my grandmother's magic protects me," I said, proud that my voice remained steady despite the way my heart raced. "These woods may be yours, but this path belongs to my bloodline." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see flecks of amber in his golden eyes. "Perhaps I don't want to harm you, Little Red. Perhaps I've watched you walk these paths night after night, tending to the sick, easing their pain. Perhaps I'm tired of shadows." His voice dropped lower, sending warmth pooling in my belly. "Perhaps I've waited centuries for someone who could see past the beast to the man beneath." His words stirred something in my blood, awakening possibilities I'd never dared dream of. I'd heard the old stories of the prince he'd been. Kind and just, beloved by his people until dark magic corrupted his kingdom. The histories in my grandmother's library spoke of his wisdom, of the prosperity he'd brought to the realm before the curse struck. "My grandmother tells me there's no curse that can't be broken," I said softly, daring to reach out and touch his hand. His skin burned hot against mine, and I felt him tremble at the contact. With the right magic and a willing heart. Alaric's eyes flashed with something like hope before shadows clouded them again. He turned his hand to capture mine, running his thumb across my knuckles in a way that sent sparks of electricity up my arm. "Your grandmother is powerful, but even she can't break this curse. The magic is bound to the moon itself. As long as it hangs frozen in the sky, I remain trapped between forms, neither fully man nor fully beast." "Then let me help you," I found myself saying, stepping closer until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I'm a healer, too. My power may be different from my grandmother's, but it's no less real." He laughed, but the sound held more pain than mockery. His free hand rose to trace the embroidered protection symbols on my cloak, his fingertips trailing fire even through the fabric. "Sweet Ruby, you don't know what you're offering. The curse doesn't just affect my form, it hungers. Each night the beast in me grows stronger, craving innocent blood. Your grandmother's magic protects you now, but if you stray from the path..." "I'm not afraid of you," I said, though my racing heart suggested otherwise. But it wasn't fear that made it pound. It was the way he looked at me, the heat in his eyes, the careful way he touched me despite the barely leashed power I could sense beneath his skin. "You should be..." He moved closer still, backing me up against a moonlit tree. His hands settled on either side of my head, caging me in without touching. "I can hear your heart racing, smell your fear, and beneath it, something else." He leaned in, his nose skimming along my neck, and I shivered at the contact. Something sweeter than fear, more intoxicating than blood. I refused to look away from his intense gaze, even as his proximity made it hard to breathe. "Attraction isn't fear, my lord." His eyes darkened at my words, the pupils expanding until only a thin ring of gold remained. A growl rumbled through his chest, more felt than heard. Dangerous words, Little Red. I'm not the man I once was. No, I agreed, reaching up to trace the sharp line of his jaw, feeling the way he leaned into my touch like a starving man presented with a feast. But you're not fully the beast either. And I see how you fight it. Why else would you warn me away instead of attacking? The stories say you've never harmed an innocent, even in your cursed form. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, hope, and hunger warring in his expression. His hands finally moved from the tree to my waist, pulling me closer with carefully controlled strength. You've been asking about me. Know thy enemy, I quoted with a small smile, even as I melted into his embrace. Or in this case, know the mysterious cursed prince who haunts my woods. Your woods? His laugh this time held genuine amusement, and it transformed his face, showing me a glimpse of the man he must have been before the curse. Bold little healer. Well, I walk them more than you do these days. You just lurk in shadows. Perhaps I've been waiting. His voice dropped to a whisper, his lips brushing my ear. For what? Someone brave enough to see past the beast. Someone with magic in their blood and healing in their heart. One hand slid up to cup my cheek, and warmth bloomed beneath his touch. Someone in a crimson cloak who dares to walk in darkness. The moon seemed to pulse brighter, and suddenly I understood. All those nights I'd felt watched while gathering herbs. All the times I'd glimpsed golden eyes in the shadows. The curse. It can only be broken by someone who chooses to love both sides of you. That's why you've been watching me. Smart as well as brave, he murmured, his thumb tracing my bottom lip. But knowing the cure doesn't make it safe to attempt. The beast in me grows stronger each night. Soon I won't be able to control it at all. I covered his hand with mine, keeping it pressed to my cheek. Then we don't have much time to waste, do we? His other hand tangled in my hair, pulling me closer until our breath mingled. Last chance to run, Little Red. Once I claim you, the beast in me will never let you go. Instead of answering, I rose on my toes and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was fire and moonlight, danger and promise all at once. His arms wrapped around me, crushing me against his chest as the kiss deepened. I felt the moment his control slipped. Sharp teeth grazed my lip, and a growl rumbled through his chest that was pure predator. He jerked back, breathing hard. His eyes shifted fully to wolf gold, and his hands on my waist ended in sharp claws. Ruby, he rasped. Run. But I stood my ground, watching as he fought for control. My hands remained on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath my palms. Slowly, his features shifted back to human, though his eyes remained wild. You're either very brave or very foolish, he said when he could speak again. I prefer optimistic, I replied, smoothing my hands over his chest. And I meant what I said. I want to help you break this curse. Not just for you, but for our realm. The eternal night is killing the land slowly. We need the sun again. He studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. Come with me, then. There's something you need to see. Taking my hand, he led me off the moonstone path into the deeper woods. My grandmother's magic flared around me, but it didn't reject his touch. We walked in silence until we reached a clearing where a frozen fountain stood, its waters caught mid-spray in the eternal moonlight. This is where it happened, Alaric said softly, pain evident in his voice. Where the sorcerer cursed me and bound the moon in the sky. He said only true love's kiss could break the spell, but it had to be given freely, with full knowledge of the beast within. I touched the frozen water, feeling the magic pulse beneath my fingers. The curse's power still lingered here, dark and hungry. A kiss given in love, not fear, I murmured. From someone who chooses you, knowing everything. Someone who walks in darkness but carries their own light, he added, touching my crimson cloak. His fingers traced the embroidered protection symbols with reverence. I've watched you heal the sick, comfort the dying, brave the cursed woods night after night to help others. You have a pure heart, Ruby, but not an innocent one. You understand the darkness. And light, I said, turning to face him. The moonlight painted his features in silver, highlighting the remnants of his royal bearing. I understand both, just as I see both in you. The prince and the beast, the man and the wolf, they're both part of who you are. He pulled me close again, one hand tangling in my hair, while the other pressed against my lower back. Be sure, Little Red. There's no going back from this. Even if we break the curse, something of the beast will always remain in me. I wound my arms around his neck, pulling him down to me. Good thing I like a little danger with my happily ever after. This time when we kissed, I felt magic surge around us. My grandmother's protective spells woven into my cloak flared to life, not to push him away, but to contain the wild magic that exploded from him. I held on as power whirled around us like a storm, refusing to let go even when I felt his form shift and change beneath my hands. When the magic finally settled, I opened my eyes to find Alaric whole and human, his eyes their original deep brown instead of wolf gold. Above us, the moon began to move for the first time in 3 years, sliding across the sky toward dawn. You did it, he breathed, touching my face with trembling hands. You broke the curse. We did it, I corrected, pulling him down for another kiss as the first rays of sunrise painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Around us, the frozen fountain burst back to life, its waters catching the dawn light and transforming it into rainbows. The curse was broken, but something of the wolf remained in the way he moved, in the fierce possession of his kisses, in the growl that rumbled through his chest when he pulled me close. And I wouldn't have had it any other way. They say the woods are safer now, though still touched by magic. The moon rises and sets as it should, and shadows no longer hold teeth. But if you walk the moonstone path on certain nights, you might catch a glimpse of a crimson cloak and a dark figure moving through the trees. The healer and her cursed prince, forever walking between shadow and light, having found their own kind of magic in the space between fairy tales and truth. My grandmother wasn't surprised when I brought Alaric home. She took one look at us and smiled that knowing smile of hers, the one that said she'd seen this coming all along. I sometimes wonder if she'd known from the beginning, if she'd woven her protective spells into my cloak, not just to guard against his curse, but to give us both time to find our way to one another. These days, she teaches us both her healing craft, combining her ancient knowledge with Alaric's wild magic and my gift for potion making. Together, we've created cures that were thought impossible. The eternal night had left many in our realm sick or cursed themselves, but with the return of natural day and night, and our combined healing powers, the land is slowly returning to life. Every evening, as twilight paints the sky in shades of purple and gold, Alaric and I walk the woods together. Sometimes he shifts to his wolf form and runs beside me, our magics twining together as naturally as our hearts have. The crimson cloak still shimmers with protective spells, but now it guards us both as we tend to our realm and our people. And if sometimes, on moonlit nights, his kisses turn fierce and his eyes flash gold, well, that's just part of loving someone who walks the line between light and shadow. After all, the best love stories aren't about perfect princes or helpless maidens. They're about finding someone who sees all of you, shadow and light, beast and beauty, and chooses to stay. In the end, that's the greatest magic of all. The villagers called them the eternal mountains, the towering peaks that pierced the clouds like ancient spears of ice. From my vantage point in my steam-powered snowmobile, their jagged silhouettes cut against the pewter sky like a crown of crystal thorns. I called them my next great challenge, though the word challenge felt inadequate as I watched storm clouds gather around their peaks, dark and heavy with winter's fury. As my vehicle crawled up the narrow mountain path, the engine's steady purr competed with the howling wind. The instrument panel cast a warm glow of brass and copper light across my gloved hands, the metal surfaces polished to mirror brightness from years of use. Steam hissed through carefully calibrated valves, smelling of oil and metal and adventure. Beyond the reinforced glass windows, snowflakes danced in hypnotic patterns, each unique crystal catching the light before joining its brethren in the deepening drifts. I hadn't come to these remote heights for the legends, though the innkeeper in the last town had filled my ears with tales of the mysterious snow maiden who protected these peaks. I still remembered how her eyes had widened when I mentioned my destination, how her weathered hands had clutched at her shawl as she spoke of a being who walked through blizzards as easily as summer breezes, her presence turning even the deadliest storms into gentle snowfall. "She's saved us all, one way or another," the innkeeper had said, her voice dropping to a whisper heavy with reverence. "But never look directly at her, my boy. Her beauty freezes the heart as surely as the deepest winter." I had smiled politely, more focused on checking my equipment than heeding supernatural warnings. I sought inspiration for my next invention. Perhaps something to help humanity survive in these harsh climates. My workshop back in the city was filled with half-finished projects, each one reaching toward the same goal, bridging the gap between human fragility and nature's raw power. Yet, as the storm intensified and my visibility dropped to mere feet, those dismissed warnings began to echo in my mind. The wind's howl took on an almost musical quality, like a chorus of voices just beyond comprehension. The snow itself seemed to move with purpose, swirling in patterns too precise to be natural. The first sign of real trouble came with a sound like thunder, except thunder had no place in a snowstorm. I looked up through the glass dome of my vehicle to see a wall of white racing down the mountainside. The avalanche moved faster than any natural phenomenon should, as if driven by an intelligent malice. In the heart of the cascading snow, I could have sworn I saw a figure of darker white, like a shadow cast by winter itself. I gunned the engine, but the snow was already upon me. The world turned white, then black. Metal screamed as my vehicle was tossed like a child's toy. Glass cracked in crystalline spider webs across my vision. The last thing I remembered was a flash of silver-white hair and eyes that glowed like the heart of a glacier, filled with an ancient sorrow that called to something deep within my soul. When I woke, I lay in a cave of ice that sparkled with its own inner light. Layers of color shifted through the frozen walls, deep blues, subtle purples, hints of green, creating an aurora in miniature. My body should have been frozen, but warmth emanated from the very walls around me, as if the ice itself had been transformed into something that defied natural law. And there she stood, the figure from my fading memories, real as the cold air in my lungs, real and more breathtaking than any legend could have prepared me for. Her dress seemed woven from snowflakes, each movement creating cascades of crystalline light that played across the cave walls. Her skin held the pale luminescence of moonlight on fresh snow, translucent enough that I could almost see the gentle pulse of power beneath. Her hair floated around her face as if suspended in water, each strand catching and refracting light like strands of living crystal. But it was her eyes that captured me, blue as the deepest ice, ancient and lonely as winter itself. Within their depths, I saw centuries of solitude, of watching mortal lives flash by like summer flowers, while she remained unchanging as the eternal snows. In that moment, all my scientific certainties crumbled like frost beneath the sun. "You shouldn't have come here, Ren Nakamura," she said, her voice like wind through icicles, musical and sharp and haunting. "These mountains are not safe for dreamers." Frost spiraled across the cave floor where she stepped, creating intricate patterns that reminded me of the blueprints scattered across my workshop desk. I pushed myself up, wincing at my bruised muscles. The air around me sparkled with tiny ice crystals that caught the ethereal light, creating halos of rainbow color. "You know my name? I know all who enter my domain." She moved closer, and the air around her shimmered with frost that smelled of winter roses and pine needles. Her presence brought a chill that somehow felt intimate rather than threatening, like the first breath of winter through an open window. "Just as I know you don't believe in me. The Snow Maiden of legend." I couldn't keep the wonder from my voice. All my scientific certainties melted in her presence, replaced by a deeper kind of knowing. My fingers itched to reach for her, to prove her solidity despite her ethereal appearance. "But you're real. Real enough to save you." Her expression softened slightly, and the temperature in the cave rose a fraction. A strand of her crystalline hair drifted close enough to brush my cheek, leaving a trail of tingling warmth and cold that lingered like a caress. "But you must leave when the storm passes. There are forces stirring in these mountains that even I cannot protect you from." "What forces? What are you protecting these people from?" I took a step toward her, drawn by an impulse I couldn't explain. The air between us grew thick with tension, like the moment before lightning strikes. She turned away, her form becoming translucent at the edges. The scent of winter roses intensified, mixing with an ancient smell of ice and stone. "Some questions are better left in the snow, inventor. For now, rest. Dawn comes soon." Her voice carried notes of longing that belied her warning words. "Dreams are dangerous things in these mountains. They have a way of coming true." Before I could respond, she melted into the air like snow in sunlight, leaving only a lingering trace of her presence. A slight warmth in the usually bitter cold, a faint shimmer in the air, and the haunting sense of something vital left unfinished. When I woke again, I lay in a normal cave, my vehicle somehow intact beside me. Sunlight filtered through a thin sheet of ice across the entrance, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the stone walls. Only a lingering scent of winter roses suggested I hadn't dreamed the whole encounter. I should have listened. Should have descended the mountain and returned to my comfortable workshop in the city, where science made sense and magic was safely confined to children's stories. But her eyes haunted me. Not their supernatural glow, but the profound solitude I'd glimpsed within them. No one should carry such loneliness, not even a spirit of winter. The village of Blythewood welcomed me with surprised warmth that contrasted sharply with the biting mountain air. Smoke rose from stone chimneys in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of pine wood and cooking spices. Children played in the snow-covered streets, their laughter bright as silver bells, while adults went about their work with the unhurried confidence of those long adapted to winter's ways. Few outsiders brave the high passes, the village elder told me over steaming cups of pine needle tea. The liquid glowed amber in carved crystal cups that caught and reflected the firelight. Her wrinkled hands cupped her drink as she studied me with eyes wise as the mountains themselves. "The Snow Maiden guides worthy travelers to us," they say. "Perhaps she sees something in you." I didn't tell her about my encounter in the cave, but my silence seemed answer enough. She nodded as if confirming something to herself and pressed a small crystal into my palm. It felt warm despite its icy appearance, pulsing gently like a tiny heartbeat. "For protection," she said simply, "and perhaps for connection." I set up my workshop in an abandoned barn at the village edge, close to the wild boundaries of the forest where civilization melted into winter's domain. The building's weathered wooden walls held the patina of ages, smooth and silver as frost. I spent the first days reinforcing the structure, adding my own inventions: copper pipes that carried steam heat, brass valves that regulated temperature, delicate instruments that measured the mountain's moods. The villagers watched my work with curious respect, bringing gifts of thick blankets woven with patterns of snowflakes and stars, jars of preserved mountain berries that burst with summer's sweetness, and stories. Always stories, each one adding another layer to my understanding of their mysterious protector. By day, I worked on my inventions, new heating systems that didn't fight against the cold but worked in harmony with it, more efficient snow-clearing devices that moved with winter's natural rhythms. The crystal the elder had given me sat on my workbench, its warm pulse synchronizing with my heartbeat as I worked. By night, I listened to the villagers' tales of their mysterious protector. They spoke of blizzards calmed by her presence, of dying crops saved by her blessed frost, of children rescued from winter's grasp. In their stories, she was both terrible and tender, as changeable as the mountain weather, yet as constant as the eternal snows. Yet none had seen her as I had. None knew she could speak, or that she bore such weight in her immortal heart. None mentioned the profound loneliness I'd glimpsed in her glacier blue eyes. The second time I saw her, I was tracking an unusual energy reading deep in the forest. My instruments had detected something that defied scientific explanation: a cold that burned, a power that made the compass needle spin in impossible directions. The crystal in my pocket pulsed stronger with each step into the wilderness. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Snow fell in perfect silence, each flake drifting with deliberate grace. Ice coated the tree branches in layers that caught the fading light, creating a cathedral of frozen beauty. My breath fogged in the air, carrying the scent of pine and something sweeter: winter roses. She emerged from a curtain of falling snow, more substantial than before. Her presence brought that familiar mix of warmth and cold that I'd started to crave like a fever. Frost patterns spiraled out from her feet, creating trails of ice that matched the racing of my heart. "I warned you to leave." Her voice carried notes of concern that belied her stern words. A snowflake landed on her cheek and didn't melt, adding to her crystalline beauty. I couldn't. The truth fell from my lips like fresh snow, pure and unstoppable. My fingers tightened around the crystal in my pocket, feeling its pulse quicken to match my own. Not without understanding. Understanding brings only pain, Ren. She spoke my name like a half-forgotten lullaby, each syllable carrying centuries of longing. The air between us grew thick with unspoken possibilities. Knowledge is not always a gift. Then let me share the burden of it. I stepped closer, watching the frost patterns shift and swirl around her feet in response to her emotions. You don't have to carry it alone. She studied me for a long moment, her eternal winter meeting my mortal warmth. The snow between us fell slower. Finally, she held out her hand. Frost immediately coated my glove where she touched it, but underneath, I felt a warmth that defied explanation. "Come," she whispered, her voice carrying both invitation and warning. "There is something you should see." She led me deeper into the forest, where the trees grew close and dark. Our footsteps left matching prints in the fresh snow, hers perfect crystals that sparkled with inner light, mine merely mortal impressions beside them. The crystal in my pocket grew warmer with each step, its pulse matching the rhythm of our movement. In a clearing stood an ancient shrine, its stone surfaces carved with scenes that caught and held the eye. Warriors battling a force of pure winter. A maiden stepping between humanity and protection. A sacrifice that echoed through centuries. At its center, a crystal much like mine pulsed with a cold blue light that seemed to reach for the snow maiden like a lover's touch. "Long ago," she said, her voice taking on the cadence of ancient memory, These mountains faced a force that sought to plunge the world into endless winter. The people here had learned to live in harmony with the cold, but this entity, the Frost King, wanted only destruction. His power turned snow to steel, ice to obsidian, winter itself into a weapon. She touched the shrine's surface, and frost spread from her fingers, highlighting the carvings until they seemed to move. A young priestess discovered that the Frost King's power could be bound by an equal and opposite force, the warmth of human love and sacrifice. She offered herself, using her warmth and humanity as the price for his imprisonment. She became the first snow maiden, forever walking the boundary between human and spirit. "You're her descendant?" I asked, though in my heart I already knew the answer. "I am her." She turned to me, and in her eyes I saw centuries of solitude. Immortality was part of the price. Each winter, I feel more of my humanity slip away as I maintain his bonds. Each summer, I remember less of what it meant to be human. Her hand still rested on the shrine, and I covered it with mine. The cold bit deep, but I welcomed it. There has to be another way. A balance between sacrifice and survival. "Why would you risk yourself for me?" Her voice held wonder and fear in equal measure. Snowflakes swirled between us, carrying the scent of winter roses and possibility. "Because I see you," I said simply. "Not the legend, not the spirit, but you. And no one should face eternity alone." Something shifted in her eyes then, a thaw in glaciers that had stood frozen for centuries. The crystal's pulse quickened, matching the rhythm of our shared breath. "Your warmth calls to me, Wren. Like spring calls to winter, like dawn calls to dusk. But it also endangers you." Her free hand rose to cup my cheek, and frost bloomed across my skin like a caress. The colder I become, the more I hunger for mortal heat. "Then take it." I turned my face into her touch, though every instinct warned against it. The cold burned, but beneath it lay a warmth I'd never known. "Take what you need." "It would destroy you." Fear crept into her voice. Not of me, but for me. "I don't believe that." Another step closer. Frost crawled up my sleeves, but I didn't retreat. The crystal in my pocket blazed with warmth, counterpoint to her winter chill. "You've spent centuries protecting others. Let someone protect you for once." The kiss, when it came, burned with cold fire. Frost spread across my skin, but beneath it, I felt her trembling with long-denied warmth. Her lips were soft as new snow, sweet as ice wine. For a moment, we stood suspended between mortal and immortal, winter and spring, duty and desire. The crystals, both hers and mine, pulsed in harmony, creating a symphony of light and power. Then the shrine's crystal flared with violent light, and she pushed me away. "He feels it," she gasped. "My weakness, my want." Ice spread from her feet, crackling across the clearing with predatory intent. "Run." But I couldn't leave her. Not now. Not ever. "Now, Wren!" she shouted, as a force stronger than life and deadlier than death engulfed her in its frosty fury. Frightened and freezing, I obeyed her command. I ran, far and fast, questioning my decision to leave her, ashamed that I wasn't brave enough to stay. Weeks passed in a chilling blur, a dance of advance and retreat. By day, I worked frantically in my workshop, studying the old stories, combining ancient wisdom with modern science. Steam and ice, copper and crystal, human ingenuity and eternal magic. Surely there was a way to bridge these worlds. By night, she came to me, drawn by my warmth, even as she feared it would destroy us both. We shared moments stolen from winter itself, her cool fingers tracing my inventions with curiosity, my hands teaching her to feel again through layers of protective cloth. Each touch burned with cold, but each burn struck deeper into her frozen heart, awakening feelings she'd thought lost to centuries of ice. "Tell me about the world beyond the mountains," she would ask, as we sat in my workshop, surrounded by the gentle hiss of steam and the ticking of delicate instruments. I described the wonders I'd seen, the machines I'd built, the dreams I still chased. In return, she shared fragments of her human life, memories preserved like flowers in ice, a mother's smile, a sister's laugh, the taste of fresh bread on winter mornings. But as our connection grew stronger, so did the Frost King's attacks. Storms raged with unnatural fury. Avalanches struck without warning. The very air grew sharp with malicious cold that sought to extinguish all warmth. "He feeds on winter's power," she explained one night, as we huddled in my workshop while the wind howled outside. Her hands traced patterns in the frost on my windows, patterns that matched the designs scattered across my workbench. "And I am winter-made flesh. The more I feel, the more power I release into the world, the more his prison weakens. Then we'll find another source of power." I showed her my latest invention, a device that could channel thermal energy, converting heat to cold and back again. Brass pipes twisted like frozen vines, copper coils hummed with contained power, and at its heart sat the crystal the elder had given me, pulsing with possibility. "If we can't break the cycle, we'll change it." She touched the device, leaving swirls of frost in her wake. "You still think science can solve what magic created? I think love can solve what loneliness created." I caught her hand, ignoring the cold that instantly numbed my fingers. The crystal flared brighter at our touch. "Your predecessor used sacrifice to bind him. But what if the answer isn't in losing humanity, but in sharing it?" Understanding dawned in her winter-bright eyes. A balance. Yes. Not warm defeating cold, or cold consuming warm, but both existing together, strengthening one another. The storm outside intensified, as if the Frost King himself raged against our discovery. The windows rattled, ice crept across the walls. But in that moment, holding her gradually warming hand, I felt nothing but hope. It took us 3 more days to perfect the device. 3 days of endless storms. 3 days of the village huddling in fear while their protector and a foreign inventor gambled with forces beyond mortal understanding. The villagers brought us supplies without question, their trust in her extending to include me, the outsider who dared to love winter itself. When the final night came, we stood before the ancient shrine as the worst blizzard in living memory raged around us. The crystal prison pulsed with blinding light, ice spreading from its base like reaching fingers. Wind-driven snow carved patterns in the air, beautiful and deadly as the Frost King's power grew. "Are you sure about this?" Her voice barely carried over the wind. She looked more human than I'd ever seen her, fear and hope warring in her expression. "Once we begin, there's no turning back. If we fail, we won't." I activated the device, watching the indicators spin to life. Steam met ice in carefully controlled spirals. The crystal in my pocket pulsed in harmony with the shrine's larger one. "Do you trust me?" "More than I've trusted anyone in centuries." She took my hands, and for the first time, her touch didn't burn with cold. The ritual began simply, her power flowing into the crystal, my device channeling it, transforming it from destructive cold to balanced energy. But as the Frost King felt his prison changing, he fought back with all his ancient fury. Ice spears erupted from the ground. The wind turned solid, sharp enough to cut. The very air crystallized, threatening to freeze us where we stood. Through it all, she stood firm, one hand on the crystal, the other gripped in mine. Our hearts beat in time with the pulsing lights, creating a rhythm older than winter itself. "Hold on," I shouted, as the device reached critical levels. Steam and ice met in impossible patterns, neither winning, both transforming. Just a little longer. The cold became unbearable, then transcendent. I felt her power course through me, no longer burning but singing in my blood. My warmth flowed into her, not weakening but growing stronger in the sharing. Science and magic, mortal and spirit, love and duty, all merging into something entirely new. The crystal's light changed from cold blue to warm gold. The Frost King screamed in rage, then wonder, as his prison transformed. No longer a cage of sacrifice, but a lens of balance, focusing and dispersing winter's power in eternal harmony. The storm above calmed, snow falling now in gentle swirls that caught the dawn's first light. When it was over, she stood solid and real in my arms, her skin still cool but no longer deathly cold. "How do you feel?" I asked, brushing snowflakes from her hair, snowflakes that no longer froze instantly at her touch. "Human," she whispered, "but also more, both mortal and spirit, winter and spring." She touched my face, and her fingers left only the faintest trace of frost. "What about you?" I smiled, watching my breath mist in the air. A little cooler, but in a good way. The village celebrated for 3 days when they learned their protector had found both love and balance. The storms still come. Winter will always have its fury. But now they're natural, clean, part of the eternal cycle rather than an ancient being's rage. She has a mortal name now, though I keep it close to my heart. To the village, she's still their snow maiden, blessing their crops with gentle frost and calming winter's worst moods. To me, she's simply my love, cool fingers intertwined with mine as we walk the boundary between worlds. Our home sits at the edge of the village, half workshop and half shrine. The devices we create together combine science and magic in ways neither of us could have imagined alone. Steam and ice dance in eternal balance, just as we do. And on the coldest nights, when we watch the aurora dance above the peaks, I remember that some loves are worth braving the storm for. They say opposites attract, but maybe they do more than that. Maybe they complete one another, creating something entirely new in the space between extremes. In the end, that's where we found our answer, not in conquering the cold or surrendering to it, but in learning to dance with winter itself. And in our dance, we found forever. My brush trembled against the canvas as twilight crept through my studio windows, bringing with it the scent of salt air and wild roses that climbed the weathered walls. My fingers, stained with ultramarine and silver, worked to capture the face that haunted my dreams, a face I knew better than my own, though I'd never seen it in waking life. Until today. The wooden floorboards of my centuries-old studio still held the day's warmth beneath my bare feet. Scattered around me, dozens of canvases caught the dying light, each one showing variations of the same mysterious features. Eyes that held the depth of ocean trenches, a jaw carved by time itself, and lips that seemed to hide ancient secrets. Some paintings were small enough to hold in one hand, others towered over me, but all bore the same ethereal quality that had earned me both fame and whispers of otherworldliness in the small coastal town of Haven Cove. The morning everything changed had dawned heavy with fog, thick enough to muffle the eternal song of waves against the shore. The air tasted of brine and possibilities as I made my way down the worn wooden steps to the beach, my usual array of supplies bundled in my arms. The damp sand squeaked beneath my feet, leaving perfect impressions that filled slowly with seawater, each one a tiny mirror reflecting the pearl-gray sky. Then I saw him. He stood at the water's edge where the sea met the shore, his dark coat rippling in the salt breeze like raven's wings. As if pulled by an invisible thread, he turned, and my world tilted on its axis. Every brushstroke, every dream, every countless hour I'd spent attempting to capture his likeness paled before the reality of him. "The paintings don't do you justice," were his first words to me, his voice carrying notes of distant shores and ancient songs. "Though you've captured my soul perfectly, Ailey." My name on his lips sent shivers across my skin like the first touch of winter frost. "How do you know my name?" The words emerged as barely more than a whisper, nearly lost in the sound of breaking waves. He moved toward me with fluid grace, and I noticed that his feet left no impressions in the wet sand. The fog swirled around him like a living thing, creating halos in the weak morning light. "I know everything about you," he said, close enough now that I could see the constellation of freckles across his cheeks, exactly as I had painted them countless times. "My name is Nader, and I've crossed oceans of time to find you." The truth spilled from him like water from a broken dam. He spoke of an ancient curse laid upon him by a goddess whose love he had spurned, not out of cruelty, but because his heart recognized even then that it belonged to another soul not yet born. The goddess, in her fury, had bound him to an eternal search. He had 30 days to find his true love and convince her to bind her soul to his, or he would fade from existence. "How many times have you searched?" I asked, my artist's eye noting how the rising sun transformed his dark hair into a crown of living flame. "This is my last chance," he admitted, his eyes holding shadows deeper than the ocean itself. "The curse allows 3 attempts across all of time. I've failed twice before, unwilling to bind another soul to this fate unless I was certain." His hand reached for mine but stopped just short of touching. "But I've never found you before. Never felt this certainty." Despite the impossible nature of his tale, something deep within my soul recognized its truth. I had always felt out of step with time itself, as if I had been born in the wrong century. My art had been my only anchor, and now I understood why. I had been painting him, waiting for him, my whole life. The days that followed unfolded like pages in a fairy tale, but filled with sensory delights that proved their reality. Nader taught me to read the secret language of stars, his fingers tracing constellations against my palm as we lay in the cool sand. He showed me how to listen to the wind's ancient stories, how to feel the earth's heartbeat beneath my feet, and how to see the magic that threaded through everyday life like gold through common rock. In my studio, he posed for me as I painted, our conversations flowing like the tide, sometimes deep and philosophical, sometimes playful as summer rain. He told me of the worlds he had seen, the lives he had lived, while I shared my dreams, my fears, and the loneliness that had always lingered beneath my skin like a shadow. We danced on the beach at midnight, our bare feet moving through the foam as bioluminescent waves created trails of living light around us. His touch left trails of warmth on my skin that lingered like sunlight, and when he kissed me for the first time, I tasted salt and starlight and centuries of longing. But time, as always, moved relentlessly forward. I watched the moon wane in the sky, counting down the days with increasing desperation. I noticed how Nader's form began to waver at the edges when he thought I wasn't looking, how he sometimes seemed to fade like a watercolor left in the rain. During storms, which grew more frequent as the deadline approached, I could almost see through him when lightning flashed. On the 29th night, as thunder shook the foundations of my studio, I finally asked the question that had been burning in my throat. What exactly does it mean to bind my soul to yours? What would I become? Lightning illuminated the room, highlighting Nader's increasingly transparent form. You would share my immortality, he explained, his voice carrying over the storm's fury. We would become guardians of love itself, bound to help others find their destined partners until the last star burns out. We would have eternity together, but never a true home, never a moment of complete rest. And if I refuse? The pain in his eyes cut deeper than any blade. Then I become less than a memory, a story untold, a song unsung. Even your paintings of me would fade to a blank canvas, as if I had never existed at all. That night, sleep eluded me. I walked the beach until dawn, the warm summer air heavy against my skin. I watched the stars wheel overhead, thinking of all the paintings I had created of his face before I knew him. Had my soul been reaching across time itself, recognizing its other half? Was love still love if fate had decreed it? But then again, wasn't all love a kind of fate? The final night arrived with a sky so clear it hurt to look at, each star burning with the intensity of truth. The full moon hung low and heavy over the water, turning the ocean to liquid silver. Nader waited for me at our usual spot, his form now so transparent that I could see the waves through his body. The sand was cool beneath my feet as I approached him, small crystals of quartz catching the moonlight like scattered diamonds. The air hummed with possibility and power, and I felt destiny holding its breath. "Before you speak," Nader said, his voice carrying the weight of uncertainty, "know that these past weeks have been worth every moment of searching. Loving you, Ailey, has been worth every second of the centuries I've walked this earth." I looked at him then, really looked, seeing every dream that had ever woken me in the night, every unexplained yearning that had led my brush across countless canvases. I thought of the life I had planned, quiet days in my studio, simple pleasures, the comfort of routine. Then I thought of the life he offered, adventure, magic, purpose, and a love that had moved through time to find me. When I made my choice, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. I stepped forward, pressing my palm against Nader's chest where his heart beat in time with the waves. "My soul has been yours since before time knew our names," I whispered. "I choose you. I choose us. I choose eternity." The moon pulsed overhead like a living heart as our lips met. Magic surged through my body like electricity through water, transforming my cells one by one until I glowed with the same inner light as Nader. I felt my consciousness expand, stretching to encompass centuries instead of decades, gathering wisdom and power like a river gathering tributaries. When we parted, the world had transformed through my new eyes. I could see the golden threads of fate that connected all living things. I felt the turn of the earth beneath my feet. I heard the music of the spheres that kept the planets dancing in their orbits. Nader's smile was radiant as he took my hand, both of us now shimmering with the same otherworldly light. Where our fingers intertwined, sparks of silver and gold danced in the air. "Ready to begin forever?" he asked, as the first light of dawn painted the horizon in shades of rose and pearl. I squeezed his hand, feeling the infinity of possibilities stretching out before us like an endless ocean. "Ready?" Together we walked toward the rising sun, leaving behind footprints that glowed with starlight before being claimed by the eternal tide. Above us, the moon lingered in the morning sky, a silent witness to a promise fulfilled, a curse transformed into a blessing, and a love story that would echo through the ages. In my studio, the paintings remained, now infused with a subtle magic that would call to other souls searching for their destiny across the vast ocean of time. And sometimes, on nights when the moon is full and the air tastes of magic, visitors to Haven Cove swear they can see two figures dancing on the waves, their forms wreathed in starlight, their love a beacon guiding other lost souls home. The scent of gardenias and rain-soaked earth fills my lungs as I step into my backyard, drawn to Mama's ancient magnolia tree. Its leaves rustle like whispered secrets in the twilight breeze, dark branches stretching toward a pearl-white moon. My work boots sink slightly into the damp grass, still soft from the afternoon shower that left everything gleaming and fresh. My fingers tremble as I touch the letter in my apron pocket. Micah's acceptance to Vanderbilt University. The heavy cream paper feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds, though it's barely heavier than the mourning dove feather I found this morning while sweeping the shop. Pride and fear wage war in my chest. Pride for my brilliant boy who's worked so hard. Fear because the numbers in my ledger keep bleeding red. The evening air carries the sweet perfume of the roses I'd arranged earlier at Richardson's Flowers and Gifts, my little shop on Main Street. Today I'd created 3 wedding bouquets, each petal placed with precision, while my mind wandered to the stack of unpaid bills waiting at home. The final notice from the electric company glares at me in particularly angry red letters. $487.32 past due. Micah's voice drifts through his open bedroom window, his warm tenor mixing with the chirp of crickets as he practices his violin. The same instrument his grandmother left him, the one he's played every evening since he was 7. Now, at 18, he creates music that makes even the mockingbirds pause to listen. A cool breeze stirs my hair, carrying an impossibly familiar scent. Honey and jasmine, Mama's signature perfume. My heart skips a beat. I haven't smelled that particular combination since she passed 5 years ago. But it wraps around me now like one of her Sunday morning hugs, warm and real enough to bring tears to my eyes. That's when I see it. A single magnolia blossom high in the branches, glowing with a soft golden light that pulses like a gentle heartbeat. It shouldn't be possible. Magnolias don't bloom in autumn, and they certainly don't glow like captured starlight. Yet there it is, beckoning to me with an otherworldly radiance. My hands move of their own accord, reaching upward. The rough bark of the tree scrapes against my palms as I stretch toward the blossom. As my fingers brush its velvet soft petals, warmth surges through me like summer sunshine. And Mama's voice echoes in my memory. Love grows in its own time, sweet girl. Trust in the magic that runs in our blood. The blossom comes away easily, its petals impossibly warm and alive in my palm. Golden light spills between my fingers like honey, and the air fills with the scent of summer mornings and childhood memories. I remember Mama telling stories about our family's magnolia tree, how it had been planted by my great-great-grandmother, how it bloomed with magic for those who needed it most, but only if their hearts remained open to love's possibilities. Morning arrives with the taste of possibility in the air. Sunlight streams through the shop windows, catching dust motes that dance like tiny stars as I position the mysterious magnolia blossom in my grandmother's crystal vase. Its glow has faded, but the petals retain an unusual iridescence, like mother of pearl in certain lights. The bell above the door chimes, and I look up to find a stranger studying my latest window display. He's tall, with silver threading his dark hair and laugh lines etched around kind eyes. His charcoal suit speaks of city sophistication, but his rolled-up sleeves and loosened tie suggest comfort with getting his hands dirty. "I'm James Sullivan," he introduces himself, his voice warm like aged bourbon. "I'm a wedding planner from Nashville, and I couldn't help but notice your work. There's something extraordinary about your arrangements." His eyes linger on a cascade of wildflowers I'd finished that morning. Queen Anne's lace dancing with purple coneflowers and black-eyed Susans, all tied together with sprigs of wild mint that fill the air with their clean, sharp scent. "I have a client in Memphis," he continues. "Old money, very particular. They want something unique for their daughter's wedding, something that tells a story. Would you be interested in creating their arrangements?" My pulse quickens at the opportunity, but practicality wars with hope. Memphis is quite a distance. "I'll handle all the logistics," he assures me, his smile reaching his eyes. "I just need your artistic touch." That evening, As I tell Micah about the opportunity over his favorite meal of chicken and dumplings, my grandmother's recipe, he reaches into his worn backpack for a notebook and pulls out a forgotten scholarship application instead. "Mom, this is weird," he says, his brow furrowed. "I could have sworn I submitted this months ago. It's for the Wilson Foundation grant. The deadline is tomorrow." The coincidence sends a shiver down my spine, and I think of the glowing magnolia blossom. The following weeks unfold like a time lapse of a garden blooming. The Memphis wedding becomes a showcase for my work, leading to 3 more high-profile events. My phone rings with inquiries from Nashville socialites and Memphis aristocrats. Each arrangement I create seems to carry a hint of magic. Flowers staying fresh longer than they should, colors appearing more vibrant than nature typically allows. James visits regularly, ostensibly to discuss business. But our conversations meander like garden paths, touching on personal grounds. He tells me about losing his wife Rebecca to cancer 5 years ago, and about raising their daughter Emma alone. I share stories about Micah, about Mama, about my dreams of expanding the shop. One evening, as golden hour paints the shop in honey-colored light, we reach for the same spool of copper ribbon. Our fingers touch, and that same warm current I felt from the magnolia blossom courses through me like summer lightning. Neither of us pulls away. "Ava," he says softly, his voice barely louder than the humming of the ceiling fan. "I haven't felt this way since Rebecca. I know it might be too soon, but there's something here that feels like coming home." "It's not too soon," I whisper, the truth of it settling in my bones like the first warm day of spring. That night, the magnolia tree blooms again, a single perfect flower glowing like captured moonlight. As I reach for it, an envelope flutters down from the branches like a fallen leaf. Inside is a letter from Vanderbilt University, announcing an anonymous donation, a full scholarship in Micah's name. The paper trembles in my hands as tears blur my vision. Through them, I watch in wonder as more blossoms open on the magnolia tree, each one shining with its own inner light, turning our backyard into a constellation of earthbound stars. The crunch of gravel announces James's arrival. He'd followed me home, concerned when he saw me rush out of the shop. Now he stands beside me, his sharp intake of breath telling me he sees the impossible beauty before us. "It's magical," he breathes with wonder in his voice. "It is magic," I tell him. And for the first time, I share the story of our family's enchanted tree. He listens without judgment, his hand finding mine in the darkness, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. "I believe it," he says simply. "I've felt it since the first day I walked into your shop. There's magic in the way you arrange flowers, in how you love your son, in the way you've opened your heart to me." The back door creaks and Micah steps out, violin in hand. He takes in our joined hands, the glowing tree, and the letter I'm still clutching. A smile spreads across his face, not the careful one he's worn since his father left, but one full of joy and possibility. He lifts his violin to his shoulder and begins to play. The sweet notes of amazing grace float into the night air, weaving through the branches of the magnolia tree like ribbons of sound. The glowing blossoms pulse in time with the music, creating a symphony of light and melody that fills our small backyard with magic. The 3 of us stand together beneath the luminous canopy, and I feel the truth of what Mama always said. The greatest magic comes from love freely given and received, from hearts brave enough to bloom again after winter's frost. Later that night, as I prepare for bed, I find one final magnolia blossom on my windowsill. As I lift it, it dissolves into sparks of golden light that swirl around me like fireflies before fading away. But its message remains clear in my heart. Everything blooms in its own perfect time, and love, like flowers, returns with each new season. Micah leaves for Vanderbilt in the fall, his dreams intact and his future bright. James and I continue to nurture our relationship, letting it grow naturally like a well-tended garden. My shop flourishes, filled with the sweet scent of success and the warm buzz of happy customers. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light turns golden and the air grows soft, I sit beneath the magnolia tree. It looks ordinary now, its branches bare of any magical blossoms. But I know its secret, that the real magic was never in the tree itself, but in the love it helped me recognize. The fierce love I have for my son, the tender love growing between James and me, and the eternal love that connects all of us to something larger than ourselves. The tree doesn't need to glow anymore to remind me of its lessons. I see them everywhere, in the way morning light catches the dew on rose petals, in the sound of Micah's laughter through the phone as he tells me about his classes, in the gentle way James touches my cheek when he kisses me goodnight. Love, I've learned, is like my mama's magnolia tree. It roots deep, reaches high, and blooms most beautifully when we trust in its power to transform our lives. Each evening now, as I lock up the shop and head home, I catch the faint scent of honey and jasmine on the breeze. I smile, knowing that some magic never fades. It just changes form, blooming again and again in the garden of our hearts, as eternal and ever-changing as the seasons themselves. Raindrops kiss the worn cobblestones of Dublin's ancient streets, releasing the earthy perfume of wet stone that mingled with the yeasty aroma of fresh-baked soda bread wafting from nearby bakeries. I pulled my wool coat tighter against the March chill, the heavy parchment of another rejection letter weighing down my pocket like a stone. The evening streets hummed with St. Patrick's Day revelry. Tin whistles and bodhran drums echoed from pub doorways, while strings of green fairy lights twinkled against the deepening twilight sky. The celebrations felt distant to me, as though I watched the world through a rain-streaked window, separate from the joy around me. At 23, my carefully plotted life map had crumbled. Graduate with honors in business administration, secure a position at one of Dublin's top firms, make my parents proud. These goals had been my North Star since childhood. My mother and father had poured their savings into my education, working double shifts at their small grocery store to give me opportunities they never had. Now, 6 months of rejection letters mocked my dreams. The drizzle softened to a gossamer mist as my feet carried me away from the main thoroughfare. The sounds of celebration faded, replaced by the gentle tap of water dropping from the eaves and the whisper of my footsteps against the stone. A sound came that stopped me mid-stride, music unlike anything I'd ever heard. The melody floated on the evening air, a tune that spoke of ancient hills draped in the morning fog, of fairy rings hidden in moonlit forests, of dreams lost and found again. It pulled at something deep within my chest, calling to a part of my soul I hadn't known existed. Following the ethereal sound, I found myself in a narrow alley I could have sworn hadn't been there moments before. Gaslight from an old iron lamp cast a golden sphere in the mist, illuminating an elderly man in an emerald green cap. His gnarled hands moved across a fiddle with otherworldly grace, creating music that made my heart ache with its beauty. The old man's eyes, when they met mine, held the deep green of Irish valleys and something more, a glimmer of ancient wisdom that seemed to peer straight into my troubled soul. "Music finds those who need it most," he said, lowering his fiddle. His voice carried the warm, rich timbre of well-aged whiskey, with an accent that spoke of Ireland's oldest hills. "I've never heard anything like it," I breathed, drawn closer by an invisible thread. The scent of heather and peat smoke clung to the old man, though no fire burned nearby. "You're carrying quite a weight these days," the elderly man observed, nodding toward the letter in my pocket. His fingers, though twisted with age, moved across the fiddle strings with impossible dexterity. I touched the rejection letter, its edges soft from repeated handling. That obvious, is it? To eyes that have seen centuries turn, clear as moonlight on water, the fiddler set his instrument down with tender care, reaching into a vest that seemed woven from shamrock green shadows. You remind me of myself long ago. So certain of the proper path, never dreaming that life's greatest treasures often hide down wandering roads. From his pocket, he drew a coin that captured and held the lamplight like a piece of fallen sun. Larger than any coin I had seen, its surface bore intricate Celtic knots that seemed to shift and flow like living things. The metal felt warm against my palm when the old man pressed it into my hand. "Here's what we'll do, young Declan," the fiddler said, his eyes twinkling like stars reflected in a wishing well. "Flip this coin. Heads, you follow your planned path. Tails, you open your heart to new dreams." As I prepared to flip the coin, the old man added softly, "But remember, sometimes the bravest choice is refusing to let chance decide your fate." The coin spun through the misty air, catching the gaslight like a miniature sun. When it landed, it did something impossible. It balanced perfectly on its edge, neither heads nor tails showing. The metal hummed against the cobblestones with a musical note that harmonized with the lingering echo of the fiddle. The old man's laughter rippled through the alley like bells on a spring morning. "Well now, isn't that telling? Perhaps the universe herself has opinions about your future." My eyes widened. "How did you know my—" But the space where the fiddler had stood was empty, filled only with swirling mist and the fading notes of impossible music. The coin had vanished too, though its warmth lingered in my palm. That night, I dreamed of music that shaped wood into living things, of hands that created beauty from raw possibility. I woke with memories of my grandmother's workshop, where I'd spent countless childhood hours learning to craft simple toys and treasures. The scent of sawdust and lemon oil had been my first perfume, the grain of wood, my first language. The next morning, something pulled me toward Blackbird Lane, where a furniture workshop had caught my eye many times before. Through the window, I watched artisans transform raw lumber into pieces that would become family heirlooms. The door chimes tinkled as I entered, filling my nose with the familiar embrace of fresh-cut oak and pine. The workshop's owner, Maeve Byrne, looked up from her workbench. Her copper-red curls were swept back with a bandana, and her eyes held the deep brown of polished walnut. Sawdust dotted her cheeks as she assessed me with quiet intensity. When I explained my situation and asked about apprenticeships, Maeve's expression remained carefully neutral. "Show me what your hands remember," she challenged, leading me to a workbench scattered with tools that felt like old friends in my grip. Hours melted away as I lost myself in the meditation of woodworking. My hands recalled skills I thought I'd forgotten, dancing across grain and shape until a small jewelry box emerged, its surfaces smooth as silk, its joints fitting together like poetry. When I finished, Maeve studied my work with the critical eye of a master artisan, before her face softened into approval. "Your hands speak the language of wood," she said simply. "I've been looking for an apprentice who understands that furniture isn't just functional, it's art that lives in people's homes, witnessing their stories." The seasons turned like pages in a well-loved book as I discovered my true calling. Under Maeve's mentorship, I learned to create pieces that balanced beauty with purpose. My parents, after their initial surprise, recognized the light that now burned in their son's eyes, the same passion they felt for their own work, serving their community through the grocery store. Maeve proved to be more than a teacher. Her creativity challenged me to push boundaries I didn't know existed. We worked in comfortable synchronicity, our conversations flowing like water over stones, each day revealing new facets of our growing connection. Love bloomed between us, as gradually and naturally as a tree taking root, nurtured by shared passion and understanding. One autumn evening, As golden light slanted through the workshop's dusty windows, Maeve discovered a small box on her bench. Unlike my first creation, this one told a story in its design, Celtic knots flowing into the grain of the wood, as if they had grown there naturally. Inside, cushioned on velvet the color of moss, lay a ring I had crafted through countless secret hours. The band combined silver and ancient bog oak, twining together like two lives becoming one. "I thought I knew my path," I said softly, taking her hand. "But sometimes the greatest gifts come when we dare to wander." Maeve's eyes shimmered like sunlight through honey as she squeezed my hand, our future stretching before us like a road of infinite possibility. Years passed, and our workshop became known throughout Ireland for pieces that seemed to hold a touch of magic in their making. Our home above the shop was filled with the sound of children's laughter and the steady rhythm of creation below. Every piece we crafted carried a small maker's mark, a coin balanced on its edge, a tribute to the night that changed everything. Each St. Patrick's Day, I tell our children about the mysterious fiddler and the magical coin. "But where did the coin go, Da?" they ask, their eyes wide with wonder. I smile, remembering the warmth that had lingered in my palm that misty evening. Back to its owner, I expect, a certain leprechaun who wanders the world, helping lost souls find their way home. On quiet evenings, when the workshop lies silent and Dublin streets are painted in twilight watercolors, I sometimes catch the distant strain of fiddle music drifting through the mist. In those moments, I hold Maeve close, grateful for the courage to follow an unexpected path that led me not to the future I'd planned, but to the one that had been waiting for me all along. For in the end, the truest magic wasn't in the coin, or even the mysterious fiddler. It was in learning to trust the wisdom of my heart. Sometimes life's most precious gifts arrive disguised as detours, leading us not to the destination we imagined, but to the one where our souls can finally dance to their own perfect melody.